Book of 2 Corinthians chapter 6 once again. And we will, just by nature of what we're doing, do a little bit of review this morning before we take the next step forward. I think it'll become obvious to you quickly why we've done this today, and really more just for the sake of visualizing some things in Scripture that I hope you'll be able to, and that God will use it today. But 2 Corinthians chapter 6, when you found your place, if you'd stand with me. The Bible says this, beginning in verse 14. We've read it several times over the last couple of services, but here's what it says. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore, come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Let's pray together this morning. Heavenly Father, I do thank you for our time. I pray, God, that you would enable, that you would really empower and teach your word today. I, Lord, know that nothing we do here is of any value except that you would do it in us and through us. But I do pray, God, that as we've looked at these concepts, we'll review them, these truths, and we'll add to it today and tonight. And Lord, that we'll begin to get a clear picture of your plan, your desire, and how we accomplish that in our lives and in our homes. And we do focus this month on family and preaching on family, but truth is family is many members or several members who become one, and everything that we really teach about the way we conduct ourselves in our home begins with us being that and conducting ourselves that way individually in our lives. No one is excluded. And so I pray you'd help today. I pray that the picture would come together from your word, and Lord, that it would have power in our lives, that we would be able to clearly measure our lives individually and our homes, and that we'd be able to adjust them so they would accomplish your purpose. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for standing, and please be seated. So we did begin last week in this passage, and we began, of course, we also looked in the 127th Psalm. And we began to sort of lay out what God's plan is for your home. God has a plan and a design for the home. Of course, we know this, if we've been around very long, that God instituted the home when he instituted marriage. Okay? And the marriage, let's say, is the bedrock interpersonal or interhuman relationship that begins to form a corporate, let's say, many-membered homes. A husband and wife come together and they begin a family, and they have a couple of crumb crunchers. Is that? Sorry, just slipped for a minute there. Children, yeah, that's what it is. And where we began this was reminding you that God has a purpose, a very clear purpose for how we live our lives and how we conduct ourselves in our home. That none of this is just sort of, let's see how this turns out. Too frequently, we kind of live life that way. Well, let's try that and see how that works out. But God has a purpose. He has an intention. And we looked last week to begin with, and just a little bit of review, but we looked at the mighty man principle from the 127th Psalm, where God describes a man with many children, or children, as being arrows in the hand of a mighty man. And we understand that principle. We look back into the prophet Jeremiah and his writings, and he talks there about how the nation will be attacked by another nation, and that their arrows will be as the arrows of a mighty man that hit their target with accuracy and also have the power behind them to stick in that target. And that really is what we're doing in our home, is we're trying to create something or develop something. God created it, that God has given us so that it has an effect. And that those who live in our home and come out of our home, that they would be transformed and they would grow in such a way that in their lives, let's say this, they would be on target. They would hit what God is aiming at in our lives, and they would have the power, the motive, right, if you will, to stick in that target and accomplish a purpose. We talked about bow hunting. It's probably a bad illustration since there are only two people here who said, I bow hunt, but picking up arrows with no blood on them and not stuck in a dead animal is not success, is it? If you're going to be a bow hunter, you want to find your arrow embedded in the heart of a big royal bull elk. And you want to cut that meat up and take it home. It is not success in our families when we don't deliberately produce what God wants us to in our homes, both in our lives and all the others. And so we saw this to begin with, that God intends for some distinctive things to come out of your home. For your home to be, again, no matter what the makeup really of it is, but to be a place where some things happen distinctively. He intends for our homes and what goes on in our homes and the relationships in our homes to enable each individual in our family and in our home and affected by it to have an intimate relationship with God. He intends that they would produce a people of a particular character. In fact, I just will turn back for a moment in my notes if you'll allow me to. And he talks about that character. I want to remind you of it. It's really all just here in this passage. Look at your Bible, beginning in verse 14, if you would. God describes, we're going to pick out the terms whereby God describes the character that he's trying to produce in every believer, and therefore he's trying to produce it through and in our homes in those who are members, husband, wife, father, mother, whatever that home is made up like. Here we go. It says this. We're going to find character. It says, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. So the first really distinction, though I wouldn't call it a character distinction, is God is drawing some distinctions between the world out there and believers, followers of Jesus Christ here. And there are to be distinctions amongst, between us and the world at large, if you will. And so he begins to describe the character of both sides. We'll look at the character that's to be produced in your home. It says in verse 14, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And the first character thing that God is trying to build in you and through you in your home is the character of righteousness. Now, we know that when we're born again, we stand in righteousness in Jesus Christ, but the expectation is that we would grow in righteousness and that we would become more like Jesus and as we go along. And he's trying to develop that character. Now, let's remember this. It's important. We'll get there by the end of the message, but we're talking about character here. Let me ask you a question. Is character primarily what we do, or is it primarily who we are that produces what we do? Character always begins in us and is demonstrated out of us. We know this. When someone does something that is not what they normally do, how do we describe that act? Like Jared, he's normally a mild-mannered superhero, and then one day he's defeated by a little chunk of kryptonite. We go, well, like, wow, that was out of character, right? I mean, he's generally a polite. Has anyone ever had Jared not be polite to him? We'll just take a little inventory here. His dad's out in the way. Okay, brothers don't count, James. No, I mean, if you've ever dealt with Jared, he's polite and he's helpful, right? And he's blushing. And it's like, why me? You were at hand, Jared. And so if Jared came in one morning and you said, good morning, Jared, and he said, shut up, old man, I don't want to talk to you, you'd be like, whoa. You'd say, what would be your next phrase? There's something wrong with him. Like, what's going on? He's acting out of character. Let me tell you why he's generally polite and helpful and all of those things, pleasant. I think there's two reasons. One is because his dad would kill him if he wasn't. But the big one is through that process, his character has been formed. And so you expect things from him because of his character, don't you? And so God is trying to do that. And he says, listen, it's the character of righteousness. Yes, it begins in us, but then it's demonstrated from us by the way we live in our life. Look at the other character traits he says here. Verse 14, the end of it says, "And what communion hath light with darkness?" You know what Jesus said? "He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." And that as a believer, not only are we given the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus, and that becomes and is to become our character that gets lived, but we're also now carriers of and walking in the light. What light? Well, the light of life. And that's Jesus. We beheld him, and in him was the light of life. It's what John writes in the beginning of the Gospel of John. And so again, it's the character of light. And there's a vast difference, isn't there, between light and darkness? I'm reviewing here. I need to probably speed up, but we talked about this last week. We look at the character of light and versus darkness. Verse 15, "And what concord hath Christ with Belial?" We have the character of Christ imputed to us at our salvation. And how could we have concord? There's the other side. We'll look at it later this morning. What concord? Verse 16, "What agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God." And he describes these character traits that are to be a part of us and that are to be built into us. They're a part of our new nature, and they're to be demonstrated and grown. And we, in our lives individually, but in our homes, are to be laboring to produce in one another's lives, and certainly in our children's lives, these character traits of Christ, of righteousness and of light and of Christ and of the temple of the living God. For you are the temple of the living God. These are not things that we put on when we come to church on Sunday morning. They're character. I fear sometimes in America we've lost the concept of character. Character is not a performance. Character causes something to be done, but character is who we are inside of us. I sometimes describe it this way, that your character is who you are when nobody else is looking. It's not the front that you put on so that everyone sees and you don't want them to know your dirty laundry. Your character is who you are when you're all alone in your house and you're flipping through the channels. And it causes you to make some decisions about what you're watching. And if you're doing this, oh, hey, I think I want to watch that, but you wouldn't if any of the rest of your family was there, that's a character issue, not just a performance issue. And so in our homes, in our lives and in our homes, God is really determined, he intends to produce a very distinct character. We should be people who are marked no matter where we go and what interactions we have. What's left behind should be this thought: there's a character there, a godly character. The second thing we really began to learn is that in this distinctive character, there's some boundaries that God sets up for us. And we began to talk about that last Sunday night, and I want to remind you that God's boundaries are for our protection. When God draws boundaries, and he did in this, we'll go through this passage again and see them momentarily, but those boundaries are not to enslave us or cage us. Those boundaries are boundaries of protection for our life. I've shared this with many of you. I'll do it again, but when we were raising our children, we might not have been the popular parents on the world. I don't know. But we did a few things with our kids that I'm glad we did. And one of them was this. We didn't allow our children to have close friendships out of a very tight band around their age. So that may sound weird to you, but I just want to tell you this. I'm raising one son and two daughters. We are raising one son and two daughters. And I know this, that there's a vast difference when my son is 12 between how a 12-year-old boy thinks and how a 14 or 15-year-old boy thinks. There's a difference. There's a difference in character development. There's a difference in interest. They're growing. Not all of that is good. Not all of it is bad. I just know there's a difference. And there's a difference between how a 10-year-old girl and even a 12 or 13-year-old girl think. And there's a difference where their focus is at. There's all of that. And so we had this really pretty unmovable practice in our home that our kids' friends were to be their age. I don't mean that they had to have the same birthday. I think you can understand that. But they would be reasonably their age. And we did it for that very reason, because they would come up, and we didn't really do much of this, but hey, a 13 or 14-year-old girl wanting my 10-year-old daughter to spend the night or hang out with them all day, I'm just saying to you, you might think that I'm crazy. I'm okay with that, but I think that this passage teaches me is exactly right, that I wanted them to be their age. I didn't want her to have to try to manage in her mind and have forming her character things that she wasn't emotionally, mentally mature enough to deal with yet. I wanted her to be able to be who she was. There's some distinction that was to be there. And so we just drew some boundaries, right? And the boundaries were for their protection. We didn't do that because we thought all those kids out there were bad that were older than our daughter. No, I was kind of anxious for my children to drive on one hand, completely scared on the other, but I'm just thinking about the number of trips it would save me when they could take themselves, but we did all of that for their protection. And God's boundaries in your life and mine are for our protection. They're to keep us from things that we can't handle, perhaps, or things that just have no product in our life. It's good for a man not to touch a woman is not written between a husband and wife. It's written between a single people who are coming together, because there is something that happens when we begin to have contact that affects our emotions and our will and our decisions that often leads to immorality. The boundaries are there for our protection. Boundaries in your home are not punishment, they're protection. The second thing about the boundaries that God puts in place in our life is that they're there to enable an intimate relationship with God. So, if my wife and I were courting, right? And I was looking into her eyes and gazing wistfully, okay? I'm embarrassing her right now. Sorry, baby. And then she started to talk to me. And as she began to talk to me, I went like this. Wow, look at that 69 GTO. '69 GTO, sorry, Jerry. You know what I'm talking about. Right? Look at that. And my wife's talking, and all I really hear over there is wah, 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 right? Because I'm going, oh, why is that not mine? What do you think our relationship would be like? There wouldn't be that intimacy, that oneness that the Bible describes in our life, right? And the boundaries that God puts in place are to enable you to keep a focus on Him in your life and in your home, that you might have an intimate walk with God, where He is all things to you. He is your Lord and your Master and your Redeemer. He puts boundaries in our life. And we began to look last Sunday night, and I know if you've been through this, you're like, yeah, preacher, move on before we run out of time. I want to describe again quickly those boundaries so we can move beyond them. And that's the reason we've done this. Because if you look in your Bible again in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, he defines or describes those boundaries for us, beginning in verse 14 again. It says, be not equally yoked together with unbelievers. Let me just get by that so you understand. That's talking about a connection or intertwining of life between two different people of different character sources that cannot be sustained rightly. It's not talking about having a business. It's not talking about going out in the world. Nothing in God's separation is isolationist at all. It is separating behind boundaries in particular ways for our good and His glory in our life. We were never called to be isolated from the world. Get that in your mind. Too often, particularly in our circles, separation has been preached as isolation. My problem with that is that's not what this book says, and you will never reach a world that you don't touch. And somehow we've got to learn, as the Bible says, to be in the world but not of the world. And it's really that issue of character that we're talking about in separation and boundaries. I can go to work and work in the world, and I can have an impact, and I can go out and talk to people about Christ, and I can engage them in all the ways that we try to engage them without becoming them or allowing them to begin to become the influencers of the direction and character of my life. Those are the boundaries God's talking about, not isolation. You should write that down in the margin of your Bible, maybe. Not isolation. Isolation is one of the worst teachings we've ever given or made consistently in fundamental churches. And here's the reason why: because we've stopped reaching the world because we're isolated from the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Here's the boundaries. Verse 14, for what fellowship? And the first boundary that we find in here is the boundary of fellowship. And there are these things that are very close. You understand there's a difference between, between agreement and agreement that creates action. This fellowship is the idea of participation. It's almost the touching or the setting around together, if you will, and that's really probably a bad description. But this fellowship is not the koinonia where we have a close fellowship, but this is just general fellowship. What fellowship? What does he say? Verse 14. What fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? So understand that there is a boundary. We'll clarify these momentarily. Just get them down. There is a boundary of fellowship between Christ and not Christ, between righteous and unrighteous. In other words, there's no way that I can go and, as a believer, there's no place for fellowship or that kind of participation with unbelievers or with the unrighteous in my life. Keep going here. Verse 14 also says, and what communion hath light with darkness? Communion's a little bit closer of a relationship, isn't it? There's a difference between like fellowship, where there's a sort of general interaction, and and between communion. Communion is when we're beginning to have some agreement on things and even beginning to become, let's say, fellow travelers in our life in areas. That's communion. Here he also says this. What agreement hath the temple of God with idols? There's a boundary of fellowship, a boundary of communion, a boundary of agreement. He says, what communion? Verse 15. And what concord? There's another kind of level of relationship with the world. What concord? Concord is now we've become all but fully yoked up together. There's no room for this between what? Between Christ and Belial. Between this, there's no agreement that produces, let's say, a promoting, a moving together, a holding the same standards and trying to accomplish the same. There's no concord. There's no place for it between Christ and Belial. And so we're to have this character of righteousness and of light and of Christ. And he says, when you have that character, that there are some boundaries that develop out of that character from the Word of God between you and the world around you. Not isolation, boundaries of influence, boundaries of philosophy, boundaries of standards and what righteousness is. It doesn't mean that we throw rocks at people out there. It means that we have places that we do not cross in our life and in our thinking, our philosophies of living, that are just like theirs. Now hear me. We have a problem in churches today that we respond to common events that happen in life just like the world around us. When we were in the memorial service yesterday, we made mention of the fact that we do not sorrow as others sorrow, the Bible says, which have no hope. When someone in our family perishes off the face of the earth, there's grieving for sure. That's a good and right thing done right. But when it, as I said yesterday, becomes your master, it's not. When it becomes your master, you understand that it's crossed over that boundary, hasn't it? And now we've got concord together. We're walking with the grief. Instead of walking with Christ through the grief in hope, we're walking with the grief as our master, for instance. And these boundaries, they set us off for our own protection in our life. And now we're sort of caught up, the boundaries of agreement and of concord and of communion, of fellowship, participation together. And I think we can see them. And here they are. So it's like, as a believer, God says this, I've set you apart. That's what holiness is. We saw it the other night, but holiness is when I've been set apart unto Christ, right? I've been set apart from something unto something. Our great setting apart, once again, is what we've been set apart unto, not what we've been set apart from. Don't spend your life looking at what you're not. Spend your life looking at who He is and what you've been set apart to in Jesus Christ. Now at this point, you're saying, yeah, but I mean, how does all of this work? Well, he describes it in this passage. And I want to describe it to you this morning in 3 terms. Here's the terms. In fact, look in your Bible in verse 14. I'm just moving some notes here so I don't have to go back and forth. The first one is this, that we're not to become cohorts of these other character traits or things in the world. What do I mean by a cohort? Let me try to give you an example. First of all, let me read to you this from the scripture. It's found in this passage in verse 14 when it says, and be not unequally yoked together with the world. That's cohorts. Okay? So let me describe cohorts by just an example from my own past. When I joined the Army in long time ago. There was an opportunity during a window there to join something they called cohort units. Cohort units worked like this. They were all in the combat arms, artillery, infantry, armor, all of those, combat arms units. And when you signed up in a cohort unit, what happened is you enlisted in the Army to be in this cohort unit. And when you went to basic training, you were put together with a group of men that had also signed up to be in that same, let's say, specialty or career field, a tanker, whatever it was. And you went for the rest of your career. This is what happened. You went to basic training. You did all of that together. You went from there to your advanced training to learn how to shoot stuff, and you did all of that together, and then you went from there to your first unit, okay? So now you're assigned to the 1st of the 72nd Armor, Bravo Company, but Bravo Company is these same guys. So you started out all the way back there in basic, you went through all of your training, and now you're at your permanent duty station, and you're with the same guys. You're now locked together. And when they decide that it's time to make one of the infamous Army moves, where we every 3 years move everybody around the world like this, they don't take individuals out of that unit. They take the entire unit and they move that entire unit together. And the purpose of it, why do you think they did that? They were trying to promote this level of unity and togetherness, of cohortedness between them. And that's really the first description of how we deal with these boundaries in our lives and in our home, is this, that we're not to be in this cohort relationship with unrighteousness, okay? To where we are pulling together on the same rope, where they are filling our life as the influence of our life and the most close relationships we have in our life. We're not to be that. We've been called to really be radically different than that. And therefore, there's really no place to be a cohort with unrighteousness or with darkness. How could those who are light become a cohort with darkness? Those two things can never really operate together like that, can they? I'll take you back to the Army. It would be like putting a cook. If you were a cook, I love you. It'd be like putting a cook into an infantry squad. Only when they wanted to eat. But when they needed somebody on that flank over there that could handle the squad automatic weapon and knew small unit maneuver tactics, and who you and them were so close that you would lay your lives down for each other, the cook would probably be like, not a part of that. The two things can't cohort together. You get it? Listen, there's another way that we do this, and it's by not being companions of the world, companions of the unsaved. It's what he says that we're to not. Let me actually read it to you, verse 17. But we're not to be the companions. Look at verse 17 with me. Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. So there's idea of not cohorting up or locking arms together to honor these boundaries in our life. This is why marriages between believers and unbelievers are so very difficult, and why God says don't enter into that. But that's not just marriage. That's any really cohort relationship with those who have a completely different character, purpose, and direction in their life. And then this boundary of cooperation, or of companionship, pardon me, where we're to come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. What do we mean by companionship? Have you ever had that one friend who no matter what you did, you two got in trouble together? Mine in high school was a young man by the name of Al Blaine. Al's dad owned a bunch of aircraft. Al was a pilot at the earliest age you could be a pilot. I would just say this, it's probably not wise to ever give a 16-year-old man, young man, unfettered access to an airplane or a helicopter. So we decided to do something. Here's the problem with doing that. We were thick as thieves, as they say, and he'd be like, "Hey, let's take the helicopter and let's go pick up these people up here." And we literally landed the helicopter on the University of Montana campus one time. Can I just suggest to you that didn't go well? Maybe our best companionship one is the day that we decided to float the Yellowstone River in high flood stage in early spring. Water just gushing down that thing. I may have told you about it before, but we jumped into it, rolled a log into that thing, jumped on that log to ride down the river. It was filled with termites. I'm not really a bug guy. That sounds weird for an Army guy, but I'm not really a bug guy unless we're eating. That's okay, but... So we started rolling that thing around to get in the water. Before you know it, that thing went to the side like floodwater does, hit a big old tree, and we went under that tree, got stuck in the branches. Thankfully, the current pulled us out of there. Now we're floating down this river, trying to get our log back in Kent. Finally, we give up on it, and there's a log jam in the middle of the river in this flood, and we swim over to there. Probably mostly got pushed over there, and decided we're going to get another log because we had somebody waiting for us with a motorcycle at the bridge, right? And we had to get down there to get home, and we couldn't get another log out. And we tried. We worked hard together. His dad started flying a helicopter around looking for us. They apparently had gone out to the river where we jumped in, found our motorcycles and shirts and shoes there, but not us, and figured that we were drowning in the river. And so we would hide every time the helicopter would go over, right? Companions. So the helicopter would fly over, we'd hide. As soon as he was gone, we'd try to get a log in. Finally, after I don't know how long, we were like, this is not going to work. And the next time the helicopter flew over, we jumped up and said, hey, here we are, thinking they would be very glad to see us in a Tom Sawyer kind of way. So Dad brought the helicopter down, pulled us out of there, goes back. My parents, we live just, a quarter of a mile from their place. And Dad landed, and I got out of the helicopter. My dad, my mom, my little brother, his mom, of course his dad was flying, his siblings, they're all standing there crying. His dad was this big guy who was kind of one of those roughnecks in the West back in the day who got out trembling and said some words I won't ever repeat, but if I wasn't so beep, 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 I'd kill you guys right now. And we got grounded, check this out, from each other. You know why? Because we were bad influences on each other as companions. When the Bible says this, when it says that we're to come out from among them and be separate, it's talking about this issue of companionship. And the issue of companionship, you understand, is very dangerous for your character if you don't pick companions who are of a like character. And so we have cohortedness, that's how we honor the boundaries. Companionship, that's how we honor the boundaries. Let me give you one more. It's cooperation. You got the 3 C's here. You'll probably never find alliteration again at this church, but enjoy it while we have it. But it is here in this passage because it does say this, that we're to come out from among them and be ye separate. That's companionship. Not be unequally yoked together. That's cohortedness. But it also says this in verse number 17. Did you see it there? Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, companionship, saith the Lord. And what's the next one? And touch not the unclean thing. There's no room for experimentation, if you will, or just the touching, the inquiring after that which is outside of the character of Christ. And the boundaries are to be honored in our life, not simply by not being cohorts, being unequally yoked together, not simply by not being companions, but they're to be honored in the area of inquiry, of consideration, of meditation even in your life. And that's the idea of touch. He says, don't even touch the unclean thing. Why? I suppose the same reason you tell your sons not to play out in the muddy parking lot in their church clothes. Because the touch always leaves a mark, and the mark easily becomes a companionship. And that all relationships, whether they be philosophical, intellectual, spiritual, and physical, all of those work together. All relationships start with a touch, and they end up potentially as cohorts. And that in these boundaries, that there are things in our life that are so devastating to righteousness, so devastating to light in your life, that the touch of them begins a process that can capture your life. Listen to this, men. If you're goofing off on the computer or your phone with images of women that you should never look at all, that is at least touch. If you keep doing it, it becomes companionship. When you add secret page marks to your internet browser and no one else can ever look at them, that's probably becoming a cohort. Because now you say, this is something in my life that's only mine and no one else can have it. I'm not talking about isolation. I'm talking about things that are for your damage and that dishonor God and that can't fit together. Righteousness and unrighteousness have no point of connection, do they? We were bought from the unrighteousness by the blood of Christ. How is there now a point of even touch there for us? And listen, we were purchased in that same way. We've been given the character of Christ. We are the light of life, or have the light of life. How is there place for communion with darkness? You understand that? There's no place really in our life to sort of play with these boundaries. And these levels of whatever you want to call them, being a cohort or a companion or just a cooperator, do you understand that those are just ways that we are pushing against the boundaries or crossing over them? Do you know why we've said to you, I don't know what you're doing? Don't have a television in your children's room. Don't have a computer with unfettered access in your children's room. Why do we say that? Touch. Oh yeah, you might think you have it under control. I'm just telling you that pretty soon it becomes cooperation. These boundaries are so important. Can I also say this to you? If you see God's boundaries as inhibiting your life, you don't know God. Because as we've already said, these boundaries are there to protect you. They're there to enable you to have a right, uninhibited relationship with God. And we are to separate from these other characters by these boundaries. Is everybody with me? And we practice that through the issues of being a cohort or a companion or even cooperating, a touch. Let me pause here. Your next door neighbor is a lost person, and they live all of those traits. You know what I'm talking about. So let's establish this first. Not every lost person is someone that when you walk by them, you go like, oh, nor should they be, right? We're in the world, but not of the world. Your neighbor's lost. I don't know. They live all of those traits. They're mean. They have foul mouths. They worship. So you can just say all of those traits. And they come to your house and say, listen, my wife just fell down. Maybe they're an elder. My wife just fell down and I can't get her up. Can you help me? Well, I'm not supposed to touch the unclean thing, so no, I can't help you. I'm sorry. I would, but I love Jesus too much to help you. Do you think that's what the Bible's talking about? You're at the gym and some guy falls down on the treadmill because he's having a heart attack. And you run over there and go like, are you okay? Are you saved? I'll get somebody to help you. I'm sorry, but I think the world thinks of us like that too often. And I think it thinks that of us because of the way we practice this idea of boundaries. That's not to touch at all. In fact, the opposite is true. That if you see your neighbor having need and you can meet it, the Bible says, and you say to them, be warmed and filled, and do nothing to give them your cloak or help them along the way, how dwelleth the love of God in you? No, that's not what these boundaries are. Let's be wise here. And realize there's a vast difference between walking on the same path with someone and stepping in and being a servant of the Most High God, holding your character of Christ in their presence. Has everybody got this? Well, what about, it's a tough one, when you have family members who live completely separate, and maybe they even live somewhat defiled. Maybe they're into all sorts of nudity, drunkenness, I don't know, just defiled. And it's your brother and his wife or whoever, and they have little kids your kids' age and their family. Whew. What do we do now? Do we say to them, I'm sorry, you're my brother, but you're not my brother, so sorry, appreciate the fact that you're going to be at the family reunion, but if you're going to be there, I'm not going to be. That's a tough one. So I'll just tell you what we found ourselves doing. That we wouldn't allow, listen to this, our children to be around those things. So there's no way, if our children and their children were going to play together, they were at our place on our terms, not their place on their terms. If my kids were there, say with my parents, and wanted to spend the night with the cousins, that was a no-go. Why? Well, because of these boundaries. They played with their cousins, there was some of that, but there was always somebody there, do you understand that? Who could help them to navigate these things from where they're at. You may think that's a blurred line. I don't think it's blurred at all. I can tell you what it did for our kids. It kept them from having to make decisions they weren't able to make. The boundaries of Christ that were put in place in our life, that were boundaries in their life, they began to protect them. Do you understand that? We love our family and they love our family. And can I tell you that as adult children, my kids have reached out to theirs and even to them in difficult times to try to be a witness, but we weren't going to dunk them in the tank because we're family. These boundaries are bigger than that. In fact, when you live these boundaries right, they enable you to have good relationships with family that might be living on an entirely different path and let them see the love of Christ in you. So we honor these boundaries. And we honor them with our life. Now let's talk briefly, so we're ready for tonight, about who's outside according to the Bible. Who's outside of the boundaries? Because we want to be able, if nothing else, to identify, how we're holding these boundaries and who they are. So take your Bible one more time back to 2 Corinthians chapter number 6, and let me just go through these with you very quickly. So we can see them lined out here for us. Let's just define them. Verse 14, what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteous? We understand righteousness is, it's the character of Christ. What is unrighteousness? It is. It's lawbreakers, really. That's the definition. Those who have a completely different character, not just actions, because religion produces activity that doesn't necessarily demonstrate character. But it's lawbreakers, full of iniquity, not equal to the character of Christ, but instead driven by the character of the world. The Bible describes them in other places. It describes lost who despise the truth. Why would you become a cooperator or a cohort or a companion of those who think the Bible or declare the Bible to be false and that are despisers of the truth? I'm not talking about trying to reach them. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about honoring these boundaries by the level of our relationship with them. Why would we inquire after that? Here's the second character, the character of darkness. That's pretty dun dun dun. Darkness is the opposite of light, isn't it? And Christ is light and the world is darkness. In fact, we know this, that the whole world lay in darkness before Christ came. And that he came as the light of the world and to bring light into the world. And there's a vast distinctive difference between the character of those who are in darkness. In fact, here's what God says, men love darkness. Why? Why? Because their deeds are evil, it says. That it's a place that you hide. The darkness is where there's shadowiness and hiddenness, and you may be trying to act one thing, but you're really hiding the things in your life that shouldn't be in your life at all. That's darkness. My dad wouldn't let me play with the kids that lived across the street. And I never could figure it out. We went to school together. We invited them to Vacation Bible School, but just to go over and play and to be at their place and all that, my dad said, nope. And I said, why? And he said, I don't know what's going on there, but I know they hide everything that's going on in their life. I'll be honest with you, as a boy, I thought, that's weird. Now I say, thank you, Dad. Because there were things that were there. And what Dad did was help me keep those boundaries between light and darkness in our life. Oh yeah, we played sports together. I don't know, whatever, but we invited them to church, all those things. But our enemies are darkness, unrighteousness and darkness. It also says this in verse number 16, that God calls those enemies of Christ idols. What agreement hath the temple of God? That's you. You are the temple of God, it says, with idols. What is an idol, church? What's that? Yes, anything that takes from your life what belongs to the Lord is an idol. Anything that takes the allegiance that belongs to the Lord is an idol. Anything that takes the priority or time that belongs to the Lord is an idol. Anything that takes the passion from your life, anything that controls your life where the Lord should control your life is an idol. We like to make lists of idols, don't we? And we say things like this, well, we don't really have images anymore. We don't. We thought about it yesterday, but we passed on that. And then we'll say this, but what about sports? Is sports good or bad? Is it in or out? Yes? I think sports are good, don't you? I think that there's a place for them in our life until they begin to take from us that which belongs to God, right? Until they take the place of God in our life. I'm okay with hitting a ball. I'm not okay with hitting a ball when it's time to be in church. Come on. I'm okay with doing all of those things. I think they're great. I think hunting's great. I think skydiving is good. And make sure you take a parachute. But I think all of those things are fun. They can be exciting. I think if you ride a bike, that's good. I think if you go to the gym and work out, that's wonderful. But if you go to the gym and work out and leave all of your modesty behind, that's a problem. Because it's taken the place of that which belongs to God. And so he says, look, there's these things that are outside of the boundaries, unrighteousness and darkness and idols. You say, preacher, I don't have any idols in my life. I would burn them if I did, except we probably do have idols in our life. Check this out. Relationships can become idols, can't they? Young people, when you love him more than you love your parents and God, you have an idol in your life. Right? And I know he's all that in a bag of chips, but it's not God, and you have an idol in your life. And so he draws these character distinctions. What the temple of God with idols. And he says, you got to watch out. He says, what fellowship, what agreement hath Christ with Belial? What is Belial? Belial is a name often used for Satan, but it literally means this: worthless, filthy, and no good. He says, how does the character of Christ have concord with the character of Belial? Now, why are we saying this? Because there is a place that God wants us to build our lives and our homes. There is this land, this boundary that God says, listen, if you're going to produce out of your home those which hit and stick and have an impact in the world, if you're going to produce a generation of servants of Christ who have a servant's heart, who have a holy nature, and who can impact the world around them, they have both the accuracy or the holiness in their life. That's chapter 7 and verse 1. It's our target. We know that. Okay? If you're going to produce holiness in your life and in your home, then you're going to have to recognize that there are some things that have no way that you can have communion or fellowship or concord or even cooperation or companionship with in your life. And again, it doesn't mean that you pull the net down and hide in fear from the world. It means that you have such a relationship with Christ that you never intermingle your life. You never begin to give your mind. You never begin to give your effort. You never begin to take that which belongs to Christ and to the character of righteousness and of light and of Christ and of the temple of God. And you never begin to intermix it at any of these different levels with those things of the exact opposite character. Because you can't produce holiness when you're standing like this at the boundaries, can you? When on Sunday I tell my kids to act one way, or maybe every day, but me in my life act another way, do you think I'm producing anything that hits or sticks? No way. The great battles with your children are will battles. They're character battles. And you've got to build in them such a character through Christ. Christ has to do this. They've got to be given to Christ and committed to Christ. But you, listen to me, you've got to build your life and your home within these boundaries that God sets, that are not isolationists, they're protective, that are for your relationship with God, so that you can come unto Him and He will be a father unto you, and you will be sons and daughters, saith the Lord. And you produce an offspring, you produce a generation, you produce a life that makes an impact, and that it's on target for Christ, that it's on the straight and narrow, if I can say that. But that arrow is flying at the center of chapter 7 and verse 1 of holiness, of perfecting or completing holiness in the will of God. And when it gets to that target, not only is it on target, but it goes pow, and it penetrates this deep down the arrow, and maybe it goes twing, or maybe that's only Robin Hood, I don't know, and it stays there no matter what comes along. You'll never get there if we don't develop a character in ourselves and in others according to the Word of God, of righteousness and truth and Christ and light and the temple of God. If you don't set some boundaries in your life of where you'll allow cooperation and companionship and cohortedness, because when you live your life testing the boundaries, Mom and Dad, you're leaving some of your kids out here. Guaranteed. And when you live your life at the edge of the boundaries, you're creating the cooperation, the touch, the inquisition, the curiosity in your children about why we don't take one more step out here. God has placed boundaries and told us how to honor them. And the whole purpose is that we're producing in our lives and in our homes that which God calls upon. A generation who are like arrows in the hand of a mighty man. Who when they become 18, 19, and 20, they're not wandering in the world trying to find out who they are. But that's all been determined in Christ. And they have already got the boundaries and standards for their life. And as they go out and begin to live, they're living in Christ, with Christ. Tonight we're going to talk about how this protects us, what God does, and if we have time, how we recover from living outside the boundaries. Now, I know this is unusual, the way we're doing this. I would challenge you, if you are confused a little bit by it, to begin by just going to YouTube and watching last week's messages and coming to here. And then if you have questions, ask them. God has established clear boundaries. He's told us what we're to be and produce, and He's identified for us those things which are destructive to His glory in our lives. And says you can't touch it. You can't walk with it. And you can't link your life up with it. Or you'll never produce that distinctive holiness that in your family and your children produce lives that matter for Christ, for their good and for His glory. We need to be real honest about this. In fact, we'll close here in just a minute. And I know this might not seem like a regular service. That's probably because it's not. We're having church, and this is a part of church. In fact, let me help you with this. If you're uncomfortable that we've done this and that we're spreading this thing out over a few weeks, I just want you to take a deep breath and get over it. This is where we feed on the Word of God. And whatever it takes to get that done well, we have to do. I want you to look at the boundaries. God's boundaries, that's what we're talking about. And I want you to look at two things here today before we leave. Number one, do my boundaries set exactly on top of God's boundaries? Fellowship and participation and communion and concord. And am I in business with someone who's heading in their life in a complete different direction than me? And say, it's okay, we're making money together. Knowing that there's an impact on all of that, on my life and on my home. I want you to look at the boundaries and see if they're set exactly where Christ's are. Are they the sound boundaries, or have we sort of redefined them? We can do that. We've done it before. And then I want you to look at how you honor those boundaries and teach your children to honor those boundaries. Are you willing to be cohorts with things that you would never want your children to be a part of? These boundaries wouldn't just be people, like personages. They would be all sorts of influences from these characters, wouldn't they? Entertainment. Do you go into entertainment that you'd never let your children, because it'd be bad for their mind, but it's good for yours? Do you take them places where, though they may not ask the question, they can't help but to be infiltrated with all of these other characters? Do you reach out but set the terms of cooperation and cohortedness in your life? Because if we don't get the boundaries in place, none of this works. The home doesn't produce a generation. Our lives don't produce glory for God to any great degree. We don't have an impact around us. And the whole reason is that God has said there's a difference between light and darkness, and there's to be no fellowship. You can't have those things, or it diminishes the light. It destroys the righteousness. It defiles Christ. It downgrades the temple of God. You can't have all of that stuff and still matter. Have your life be holy and right before God and honoring to Christ and impactful in the world. And so don't test the boundaries, set the boundaries, follow or allow God's boundaries, and don't walk outside of them. Don't do all of those things. Why? Well, because it's going to destroy what Christ is trying to build in your life. It's going to eliminate holiness. You know what we do when we push the boundaries? We redefine holiness. We define holiness as not as bad as them. That's not holiness. Holiness is being set apart unto Christ, consecrated for His glory. Look at the boundaries. Look at where you've set them, and look at how you honor them in your life and in your homes today. Do you see them? Now decide if you need to make some changes. Because most likely, we do. That we've let some cooperation exist, some companionship exist that doesn't belong in our life. You see that? Now are you willing to take that and set it on an altar and let Christ destroy it out of your life so that you could live your life in a place where holiness is the norm and being produced, and where glory and effectiveness for Christ becomes the habit, the standard. Look at your boundaries. Look at how you honor them. Find out what needs to move. And right now, this minute, slip down onto your knees and begin to do business with God about those boundaries. Stand with me. I'm going to pray. The piano will begin to play as I pray.